Hello, welcome to Discovery Class. Today I'm going to talk about a subject that you all know about. I'm going to talk about the family. All of you are in a family. If you weren't, you wouldn't be here. You had a dad, you had a mom, you probably got a brother and a sister, you got relatives. Maybe you're now a grandpa. Maybe you're a great-great-grandpa and grandma. Whatever it is, today I think you're going to enjoy our talk. And I'm going to tell you the story from the Old Testament, and it's in a book that you seldom read. And I know it's a chapter that you've probably never read. I'm talking about the Book of Proverbs. And I'm going to be reading from chapter 14. It begins and ends with the very same theme. What it says, verse 1, Lady Wisdom builds a lovely home. And then at the tail end, it says this about, same thing. Lady Wisdom is at home in an understanding heart. As you can see by the beginning and the ending of this chapter, he's talking about the family. Now, I've outlined this through an article that I read recently, written by a Chinese journalist. And that may seem strange to you because the article, to me, when I read it, seemed very strange. It was written by a Chinese communist. Now, a communist journalist in China can only write what the government of China tells them to write. There's no free speech. China is under a communist dictatorship. Xiaoping is the chairman for life of that Politburo. And there's no dissent in China. Religion is atheism. There's no God. The God that they worship is the state. And because there's no dissent, you would never see any truckers in downtown Beijing protesting like we have in our capital here in our country. Now, China is a very powerful nation today. They boast of having the best nuclear weapons, the best air force, the best navy, the best army, and probably the best rockets. They're going to put a man on the moon next year. But the greatest force in China, the Chinese don't talk about. They have a secret weapon. It scares everybody in the top of their government, the Politburo. And the funny thing is they can't stop it. Do you know why? In China today, they have an underground organization that I call the Underground Church. Christians in China can't declare that they're Christians. They keep that silent. They meet secretly. They hide their Bible. They don't protest, but they're there. And nobody knows how many there are. The man I'm going to talk about who wrote this article is Lin Tain Yi. That's a good Chinese name. He's a journalist. He wrote the article, and the article is about the family, what I'm going to talk about. It's so well written. The communist government, even though it's an atheist nation, I don't think they're going to dispute this, because when you read it, you will almost think it came right out of Scripture, but all the hidden content is kind of in the background. Mr. Yi, I could be wrong, but I think the man, he must be part of the underground church. In his writing, he mentions 4 building blocks. He talks about meaning, he talks about continuity, he talks about nurturing, and he talks about purpose. All those 4 things are what the family provides. Let me read for you the article, and you can decide for yourself what you think. Then I'll move on and tell you what it says in Proverbs. Families, according to him, have always been the building blocks of society. Every other achievement of civilization, art, philosophy, literature, material things, they pale in comparison. The family provides meaning, continuity, nurturing, and purpose. And there's no engine of progress, security, or social advancement as powerful as the family. Can you imagine the Chinese government hearing that? And there's no instrument of economic growth, investment, job creation, or training as effective as a functioning family. But this next sentence says it all. There is no cultural institution as enabling as a family life, and there's no better way to raise your young, protect the weak, or protect the elderly. Tell me, class, have you ever read a better description for the family than that? Now, what I just read to you by Lin Tain Yi is all summed up here in this 14th chapter of the Book of Proverbs. I'm going to use the outline, and I'm going to point out that the theme of the family of our study is going to be our watchword this morning. Remember what it says. The family is going to provide meaning, continuity, nurturing, and purpose. So let's look at it. Now, men, those of you that are here watching it with me, you're married, you've had children, you practiced what this outline represents. So I'm going to take Mr. Yi's thoughts and I'm going to illustrate them with his thoughts outlining all the way down through verse 35, because it's a long chapter, but don't get bored. I'm only going to give you the highlights. Here's the first thought. The family provides meaning. From verse 1 through verse 4, the passage is made up of 4 strong verbs. Here's what it says. Now, these are the meaning. Wisdom builds, honest life shows, wise speech evokes, and a good harvest requires strong. You can see by the meaning of these words, builds, shows, evokes, requires. Yesterday, I went to my eye doctor for my annual checkup. Now, my eye doctor's an older man. If you look at the shingle on the wall where he graduated from the University of Waterloo, it's a way, way back in the late 60s. I can tell the guy's old because when I went in to see him, he wears a suit and tie. Do I need to say anything more? Anyway, when he got me there, he took me into a room and I sat in front of 4 different devices. And I don't know what they do. But I do know that after I was done, I was ushered into his room, sat in a high chair. He turned the lights off and he began to explain what went through those other tests. But the funny thing was, every time he would do something and put it on the wall, he'd say to me, my. And then he'd do another, my. And I thought, I'll bet my eyes are going to fall out. I bet I'm in trouble. My. When I was all done, he turned the light on. And I said, Doctor, is there something wrong? He said, no. But I'm looking at your chart from 16 months ago, and I'm looking at your chart now, and nothing has changed. He said, that's very unusual for a man your age. He said, usually things begin to accelerate. We're talking cataract. You haven't got any of that. And he said, I'm quite amazed. And I said, is that good? Yes, he said, that's very good. I didn't tell him, but when I came into the office, I had gone to the bake shop and I picked up a loaf of bread. And I thought, I'm going to take the old boy a loaf of bread. And whether he receives it or not, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to give him a loaf of bread. So I brought him a loaf of bread and I told him it's for him and his wife. I don't know his wife. He said, in all the years that I've practiced, I have never had anybody bring me anything. Why are you bringing me this? I said, because tomorrow, when you're having your toast and jam with your wife, I want you to remember me. He said, well, I will. All I'm saying to you, there is meaning in life. And sometimes that meaning involves building, it involves showing, it evokes respect, and it requires a good harvest. That's all in those verses of the first beginning of Proverbs 14. All right, let's move on. The family practice also has continuity. I describe continuity as repeating a good golf swing. If you can repeat your golf swing, chances are you'll keep the ball in the fairway. If you can't, you'll probably find it over in the orchard or the rhubarb. A good golf swing hits the ball straight down the fairway. Well, that's what continuity does in living. Verse 5 through verse 13 speaks of continuity. I'll begin at verse 5. He talks about a true witness never lies. His speech is not false. Well, that's continuity. Verse 6. Be open-minded. Never stop learning. If you do, wisdom won't show up at your doorstep. That's continuity. 7. Escape the company of fools. They're going to waste your time. That's continuity. Verse 8. Life is a track. Wisdom will try to get you on track and keep you on track. That's continuity. Verse 9. The stupid and the ridiculers are usually wrong. But a moral life is more favored. That's continuity. Verse 11 and 10 and 11, they're most the same. If your life is careless with wrongdoing, you'll end up living in a shack. But if your life is holy, chances are you're going to live in a cathedral. That's continuity. I have a friend of mine who, same age, he told me the story of his granddad. His granddad grew up on a farm with a lot of kids. He was the oldest. And in the fall, they did their plowing. And most of their work, there were no tractors in those days. They had draft horses. And because he was only 12, he had not a double hitch, just a single. And he had the plow, and he'd do one furrow. He'd go down, turn around, come back over here, and do another. And that's what he kept doing. It was in the fall of the year, and it was later in the afternoon, and he was just about finished. He had made the turn at the far end of the field, and he was coming back, and his horse's name was Toots. And Toots was a draft horse. Have you ever seen a draft horse? Well, you've probably seen the ads on the Super Bowl regarding Budweiser beer. Have you seen those Clydesdales, the 4-horse hitch? Isn't it amazing what those horses can do? And they're gentle giants. A little child could lead them. Amazing animal. Anyway, that's what he was driving. That was Toots. When he got almost to the house, Toots did the strangest thing. Do you know what he did? He stopped. Right in his tracks. He just stopped. And the young 12-year-old boy, he said, Toots, we're almost finished. Keep going. Toots didn't move. And he thought, he got more angry by the moment he began to pull the reins. He whistled. He began to click his cheek. The horse still didn't move. Finally, he laid the reins on top of the plow and he walked to the front of the horse. Do you know what he found? There in the plow hole Right down in the furrow was his baby sister. She had come from the house and she was playing in the furrow. And Toots, having come that close, he stopped. Have you ever seen a hoof on a horse that size? If you look at a draft horse, do you know their feet are almost as big around as the lid on a garbage pail? Can you imagine what would have happened to that tiny little girl if Toots hadn't stopped? Well, you know, that 12-year-old boy grew up, got married, and he was so impressed with his memory of what happened back there on that plow that he called his wife Tootsie. So all his life, the love of his life became the name of his horse, Tootsie. Why am I telling you that? Continuity. Even an animal knows its continuity and how they behave. That's what a family is. Family is based on continuity. What you learned yesterday, you keep today, and you do tomorrow. That's what that horse did in the furrow, saving that young girl's life. Okay, thirdly, here's Ye's third building block. He calls it nurturing. The Webster Dictionary says of nurturing, it means to feed. It's really nourish. It means to educate. Verse 14 all the way down through 23 is really, in chapter 14, education. It's talking about nurturing. What are you going to learn? And if you learn these lessons, how do you apply them? Let me go down through them, and I'll do them quickly. Verse 14. A mean person gets paid back with meanness. A gracious person gets paid back with grace. Meanness begets meanness. Graciousness begins grace. That's family nurturing. Verse 15. The gullible believe anything. The prudent, they weigh every word. That's nurturing. Verse 16. Wise people watch their steps, and they avoid evil. Fools, they're very headstrong, and they can become very reckless. There's a very thin line, I think, between headstrong and avoiding evil. 17, 18, 19, and 20, I call them the couplets. They say the same thing. The hot-headed do things they regret. The foolish dreamers are full of illusions. The losers usually get shunned. All this adds up to being evil will pay tribute to the good. Be careful what you nourish, because what you nourish will be what you'll be fed, and that's nurturing. Well, this brings me to the last point. He talks about purpose, and it's long. It goes all the way from verse 21 all the way down to 30. Let me highlight it. Compassion for the poor gives you a blessing. That's a purpose. Thoughtful people win love and trust. That's purpose. Hard work pays off. That's purpose. 24, the wise accumulate wisdom. That's purpose. 25, truthful witness saves souls. That's purpose. Fear of the Lord builds confidence. Verse 26. 27, the fear of God is the spring of living water. Well, that's purpose. 28, a good leader has loyal followers. 29, slow to anger makes for deep understanding. Finally, 30, a sound mind makes for a robust body. It keeps you fit. Now, what is Proverbs 14 saying? The family blocks are meaning, continuity, nurturing, and purpose. Lin Tang-yi, remember the Chinese journalist? He says there's no engine of progress, and there's no security, and there's no social advancement as powerful as the family. There's no instrument of economic growth, investment, job creation, or training as effective as a functioning family. Verse 32 of the Proverbs says, the evil of bad people leaves them out in the cold. The integrity of good people creates a safe place for living. Isn't that the family? And verse 33, Lady Wisdom is at home in an understanding heart. Let me tell you about a man that never had a family. But boy, does he ever teach me a lesson on me as a dad and a granddad, how to have a family. His name is George Matheson. He was born in Glasgow, Scotland, March 27, 1842. He was the oldest of 8 children. Very smart. He went to the University of Glasgow and studied classics and philosophy. And believe it or not, he graduated at the age of 19. When I was 19 years old, I don't think I could put my shoe on the right foot. This guy graduated at 19. Tragedy struck him, though, in his final semester of his graduating year. He was told by his doctor that he was going blind and that it was going to accelerate and they had nothing to fix it with, and he would be blind within 3 months, and he was. That wasn't the blow that was the heaviest, though. His heaviest blow came because in his last year, 19 years old, he had fallen in love with one of his classmates, and they got very close. And they had proposed, and they had made plans for the wedding. After the doctor told him that he was going blind, he had to share that with his fiancée. He broke the news of his impending blindness. He said to her, "Will you still marry me?" To his shock and to his deep sadness, her answer was a dagger right through his heart. She said to him, "No, I'm not going to be the wife of a blind man all my life." They parted. He never saw her again, and he never married. Move the clock ahead. He's graduated, he went on to seminary, and he became a pastor, even though he was blind. June the 6th, 1882, he's now 40 years of age. His youngest sister is getting married. He's living in Ellen, which is a little town just west of Glasgow by 11 miles. It's a fishing village. And it's the Friday night rehearsal at the wedding there at the church. And as he did the rehearsal, everything went beautifully. Oh, and she was just gorgeous, his little sister. And when he left, and they all departed, waiting for the wedding the following day, he went home to the parsonage because there was a manse right next to the church. And when he went back, he went into a severe mental pain, he said. And he began to feel sorry for himself. And he began to think all those memories when he graduated and the fiancée that he could have had. And she said no. He lost all of that. So family and love, children, grandparents, all of that was gone. But it all flooded in his mind to think, what if? What if? As he was sitting there in sorrow, let me read to you what he did, because I find it very fascinating. He took his pen, and it was just a quill and a bottle of ink. Remember, he's blind. He's going to write it, but his secretary is going to read it to him after. He writes a hymn. Here's what he says. The hymn was the fruit of my suffering that night. It was the quickest bit of work that I ever did in my life. I had the impression of having it dictated to me by some inward voice. The hymn in its intensity was so complete that I don't think it took 5 minutes to write it in its entirety. And after I was done, I never retouched it and I didn't correct one thing. Now, I have no natural gift for rhythm, he writes. This piece was almost like a day spring from on high. Through illness and desertion, George Matheson gave the church one of the most beautiful songs that I think I've ever sung. It was so good, as a matter of fact, that Queen Victoria heard about it when her husband died, when she was down in Buckingham Palace. And she asked him, living in Glasgow, if he would come over to Balmoral Castle, where she had her summer home, and would she hear him in that little chapel read what he wrote to her out of the pain that he had suffered in the loss of his life in blindness and girl, fiance. You're saying, well, what did he write? Here it is. I won't give it all, but I'll give you the first. O love that will not let me go, I rest my weary soul in thee. I give thee back the life I owe, that in thine ocean depths its flow may richer, fuller be. Class, those are gorgeous words for a man that lost his love and lost his family and lost his whole beginning. And there's what he wrote, O love that will not let me go. He lost her, but God wouldn't let him go. And all of this is really vertical. And he's really sharing what God gave to him, and probably God gave the same to you. Now, you don't live in Balmoral Castle, but you know your little home is a castle. Why don't you take those words from your hymn book and write it? And why don't you pin them to the door of your refrigerator? Or better yet, go hang them on the mirror in your bathroom. And when you're starting your day, why don't you let those words tumble over you? They're wonderful. The other day when I was coming home from work, I was thinking of the third verse, and I'll tell it to you. I have a son that lives with me who has schizophrenia, mental illness. When I take him for a drive over to the drugstore to get his drugs and his meds, he never sits beside me. He always sits in the back seat, so that when I'm driving, all I can see him is up through the mirror, in the rearview mirror, and there he is. And it's sad because he's talking to himself. There are voices in his head. He's got racing thoughts. He isn't audible, but his lips are always moving. And it's so tragic because he has no work, he has no job, and I don't know if he'll ever come out of that. He's in his mid-50s now. But you know, the verse that really comes to me in that is the third verse that Matheson writes. And here's what he says. O joy that seekest me through pain, I cannot close my heart to thee. I trace the rainbow through the rain, and feel thy promise is not vain, that morn shall tearless be. There's a day coming, class, when my son and I are going to look at each other, not through the rearview mirror, but to each other, and we'll have a decent conversation. And I think that may not happen, class, until I get to heaven. But I know it's coming. And that little verse from that author has given me a lot of hope. So, pin it on your door of your fridge, and go put it on the mirror, if you want, in your bathroom. You may find it's a lovely antidepressant. Well, the time on the wall is gone, but I've still got time to give you a smile from the sunny side of the street. Years ago, my boys came home from a garage sale, and they brought a barometer. It was a big, long piece of ornament. Beautiful thing, hardwood, nice faceplate, big dials. And when they came in the door, they bragged about, Dad, look at what I bought. It only cost $1. Well, no wonder. The thing didn't work. It had 2 sets of hands that would do this, and it would tell you what it was to be in the changing of the weather, because a barometer is a weather vane. It's telling you what's going to happen with the pressure in the air. Is there going to be a storm tomorrow? Is it going to be mild? Is it going to be high pressure? Is it going to be a nice sunny day? Well, I couldn't tell the weather, but my boys hung it on the wall, and it did tell me my sermons. And after they'd come to church and they'd go home, they couldn't wait to take those dials and readjust them to describe Dad's sermon. And some of them would go like this. One day they put it up wet and stormy. But the one I like the best, and they use it all the time. Dad, today we're going to measure it. It's dry and windy. Thanks for coming. Next week, come on back. I can't wait to see you again. I'm so happy you come to my class.